Thomas Jefferson talked about a democracy being one of the most vile forms of government known to man. And when you take into account things like oligarchies and monarchies and anarchy and other forms of government, that's a pretty powerful statement. Yeah. You know, I think outside of lack of education, I would say that the Federal Reserve, for me, is one of the biggest problems going on culturally, because the entity that controls the money supply controls the issues. And when you can print money at the push of a button, basically digitize debt, we know by simply looking at history and looking at what's going on now, when you have the powers that be that can create money out of thin air, people die. People die. And I think when I say that, people think that's hyperbolic speech. No, people die when governments do that sort of thing. Look at Venezuela. And simply, there is no political savior that's going to intervene to save us. And so I find it interesting what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, educate the people. Educate the people, and tyranny will vanish like evil spirits at the break of dawn. He didn't say find that next guy and make sure you got the right president in office and tyranny will disappear. He didn't say any of those things. He said educate the people, empower the people, make sure they hold the standard high, make sure they understand the principles of freedom, and that in turn we're electing individuals that reflect those values. So we know what the solution is. The solution is not who our next president is, who our next congressman is, although those things are important. But what I'm suggesting is that they are symptomatic of the bigger issue of where we're as a society in terms of education. I think the example of Elon Musk is phenomenal. Of someone who's saying, you know what, I'm not waiting for government to come in and solve the problem, I'm going to come in and solve the problem. Right? So you have individuals using resources to go in and solve the problem. And what do we do every time that we look for government to resolve an issue? Government grows bigger. I thought we wanted small government. Every time we have a problem, government go in and take care of that issue. Government grows bigger. You don't have to convince people that freedom is the right answer. You just speak the truth, and truth is sweet to the ears. So often we're fighting about bad ideas versus good ideas, and we're beginning to establish a firm foundation in what brings us together. Because I think it's time to unite on a cause and stop dividing on differences. And yet, what is it that the media wants us to divide on differences? Right? You're black, you're white, so you should fight. You're rich, you're poor, you should fight. All these sorts of things. But we all agree as human beings on this idea that we want to be left alone. And the Declaration of Independence tells us what our philosophy of government is. The philosophy of our American government is this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those being life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It then goes on to tell us that government's job is to do that, to secure those rights. And it tells us that governments are instituted among who's doing it? Whose job is it to put the government in place? Where does the power derive from? Me and you, the people. There's 250 bureaucracies that pass about 6,000 different regulations every year onto the American people. Is a regulation a piece of legislation? No. Yeah, it is. Okay, it's not technically legislation, but is it forcing individuals to do certain things or else? Yes. So in that regard, it's legislation. Who's the only entity that has the legislative power? Congress. Guys, it says in Article 1, Section 1. Note this down. Article 1, Section 1 says this. All legislative powers herein granted are vested in who? Vested in Congress, the House, and the Senate. I don't read anything about all legislative powers herein granted are vested in the House and the Senate and the other bureaucracies that they might seek out. If I could sum up the Constitution in two phrases, it would be this. Men and women are born free, and men and women cannot be trusted with power. That's your Constitution in a nutshell, guys. Like, let's not make this thing difficult. Well, I know a lot of you, others I'm meeting for the first time, and I just want to tell you it's an absolute pleasure to be with you. We're going to have a lot of fun. I hope you didn't come here thinking you're going to have some guy standing behind a podium lecturing to you, because that's not going to happen. We're actually going to engage together. I'm going to teach some foundational principles, but I want to engage together. Like, there's probably going to be some debate that goes down where there might be some disagreement along the way. Okay, someone wants to fight, right? But listen, here's the thing that I love about America. What brings us together, there's a common foundation, and we're going to talk about what that foundation. We might disagree in the execution on how we get there. We look at the Founding Fathers, one of the things that was very clear was they agreed on foundational principles, but there was disagreement along the way on how we execute. Now, I don't believe that the Constitution is the problem like we're being told. I believe the Constitution is emphatically the answer. It is the answer. It's getting back to those principles. It's honoring the principles of limited government. It's protecting the idea of agency, that people should be able to live their lives as they wish to live them. It's limiting government. It's separating power. It's dividing authority. It's getting back to this idea of popular sovereignty, that the power resides within the people. And then ultimately getting back to what kind of government do we live in?
Republic.
That's the idea. Right, that's the idea. It's a Republican form of government.
Didn't really keep it that
Yeah, a republic if you can keep it. It's not a democracy. Emphatically, it's not a democracy. Thomas Jefferson talked about a democracy being one of the most vile forms of government known to man. And when you take into account things like oligarchies and monarchies and anarchy and other forms of government, that's a pretty powerful statement. And we use that term, democracy, very loosely. We'll talk about that a little bit here tonight. But let me ask you guys, if you had to identify, I don't need to see my name. How you doing? Let's talk about that. If you had to identify the greatest problem going on, that if we could fix it, we could turn things around. Now, I want you to think about that for a quick moment. And let me just tell you, we're going to walk through some things. I want to get some ideas, exchange some ideas back and forth. I want to move into some of these foundational principles.
I do not know how to work it. So.
Testing.
That's the problem.
You're going to have to use your larynx.
Good.
All right.
We're good.
Okay.
So we're going to walk through some of these foundational principles. And then, of course, I'm going to give you some ammunition. I'm big on vetting candidates. I don't believe vetting candidates has much to do with, are they nice? Is their hair combed right? Do they have a great smile? Do they kiss hands? Or kiss babies and shake hands? Right? Do they do that well? Like, I have a lot of friends that run for office that never got my vote, and they know that they didn't get my vote. Because my barometer is not whether you're a good person, although I think that's important. Being honorable is a good quality and an important quality. But more importantly, I want to know, when you take that oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, do you understand what that means? And what we're seeing right now is that we live in a culture that all levels of government, individuals don't understand that. I've been out to Washington, D.C. I've testified in front of Congress. In fact, back in 2012, I went to meet with all of the freshman congressmen. And what you're going to hear today is some of what I shared with them. And most of them looked at me like I had three heads. They had no idea what I was talking about. When you start talking about the enumeration of powers, and you talk about the vesting of certain things that the legislature is permitted to do, and then marching into the enumerated powers of the president. Like, they had no idea what I was talking about. There was confusion. Why? Well, because politics is downstream from culture. Politics is downstream from culture. So what we're seeing happen politically is a direct reflection of the culture. When you have a people that don't understand liberty, what tends to happen? You tend to vote in individuals that don't understand liberty either, because the barometer for the people is not liberty. Right? It's something else. It might be free stuff or something like that, or I just want to get my buddy into office. It's a train wreck what's going on. So I'm going to give you some ideas when it comes to vetting candidates. And I know, Utah, you're in an interesting position. You have some things that just went on. But this is designed to have a bit of a snowball effect and to get us talking a different language. And so let me ask you, going back to the question, if you could fix any problem, what would that be?
Election integrity.
Okay? Election integrity. So election integrity, that's an important one, right? If the very system that we utilize to elect an individual does not function properly, it becomes an oligarchy. It becomes mob rule, right? It becomes whatever it is that the people in power decide that it's going to be. So integrity within the election process is important. I heard another comment. Fiat. Why is that a problem?
Robs all our purchasing power.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think outside of lack of education, I would say that the Federal Reserve, for me, is one of the biggest problems going on culturally, because the entity that controls the money supply controls the issues. And when you can print money at the push of a button, basically digitize debt, we know by simply looking at history and looking at what's going on now, when you have the powers that be that can create money out of thin air, people die. People die. And I think when I say that, people think that's hyperbolic speech. No, people die when governments do that sort of thing. Look at Venezuela. Yeah. Venezuela was the wealthiest country in all of Latin America 20 years ago. Today, not enough garbage cans to eat out of. What happened? There's a lot of moving parts to that particular problem, but one of the central features of that problem was a government that began to print money, thinking that their ideas were better than economics 101, right? And so that's a big problem. And so something that needs to be dealt with. And it's not going to be easy to deal with, but there are some solutions out there on that whole idea of fiat. Yeah, Kathy.
And it's what you said, education.
Yeah.
But bigger than that, the apathy, those who don't know and don't care.
Yeah, you can't defend something you don't understand. And I believe that this is one of the biggest issues right now, and there's a solution. We're constantly focusing on, man, who's our next president? Man, if we get the right guy in office, we'll fix it all. There is no political savior that's going to intervene to save us. And so I find it interesting what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, educate the people. Educate the people, and tyranny will vanish like evil spirits at the break of dawn. He didn't say find that next guy and make sure you got the right president in office and tyranny will disappear. He didn't say any of those things. He said educate the people, empower the people, make sure they hold the standard high, make sure they understand the principles of freedom, and that in turn we're electing individuals that reflect those values. So we know what the solution is. The solution is not who our next president is, who our next congressman is, although those things are important. But what I'm suggesting is that they are symptomatic of the bigger issue of where we're as a society in terms of education. So education is ultimately, at least from what our founders talked about, is a big part of the solution, and that's why we're here. Yes?
Accountability.
Yeah, talk about that. What do you mean by accountability?
I was in the military for 20 some odd years, and I couldn't get away with doing something that was wrong.
Yeah.
Because I was accountable. I was accountable to my subordinates, and I was accountable to my superiors.
Yeah.
And if something went wrong, somebody would hang for it.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your name?
My name's Chris.
Chris, thank you for your service. I want to amplify this point that I think is so important. This issue of accountability is critical. I mean, think about this. If you had, say you had $10 million that you wanted to put in trust. So you're going to put together a trust, and you're going to find a trustee. So, Chris, you're the trustor. You've got $10 million.
Okay.
And I'm the lawyer. Is that okay?
Okay.
I'm retired, by the way. That's the good news. I know all you guys got crankies. The bad news is I was a lawyer. The good news is I retired 7 years ago. And also the good news is University of Utah. Anyways, so you're the truster, and I am the trustee as the attorney. I'm going to handle that $10 million. Well, I decide that I'm going to take a part of that $10 million and do what? What's that? No, I don't need a bridge. I do need a Ferrari, though. I do need a Ferrari. And so I take some of that money and I buy me a couple nice cars, and I'm driving around town, bringing my friends together, check out what I got. What would happen to me?
What should happen?
No. Okay. All right. I see you there. What should happen?
Well, you should be tried
And I get the feeling,
found guilty.
yeah, I get the feeling that it wouldn't just be about a trial for you and being found guilty. I kind of hear the words, hang them and hang them high. Is this what I'm hearing? Right? So, but this is right. That's what would happen in our culture. Is an individual who stole that money would go to prison. He'd go to prison. We have the same thing going on with the Constitution. Who are the trusters of the Constitution?
We are.
You and me. Yeah. And yet, who are the trustees? You got 535 individuals in Washington, D.C. that sit in Congress that are supposed to be the trustees. But what happens when they violate the trust?
Nothing.
They get to keep their jobs and make lots of money. And Thomas Sowell said it best. What's that?
And get a raise.
And get raises, yes. So Thomas Sowell said it best. What are typically these individuals concerned about? Elections and re-elections. That's the focus of these individuals. So the trust doesn't matter. And of course, there's a lot of arguments. We're going to get into this here in just a moment on, is the Constitution a document that's relevant to our day? And yet there's a lot of folks there. They're saying, yeah, I'm taking an oath. But someone was telling me about a senator. I was on the phone with an individual that's running for U.S. Congress here in Utah. I was on the phone with him, and he was telling me about a senator that you had here who talked in a private meeting about the Constitution not being relevant to our times. That is very much an obstruction. And we're going to talk about that. But think about that. Why we have individuals taking an oath, apparently the promise means nothing. They're the trustees, and they're violating that trust. And I'm going to show you some video. I've got some great videos here to show you. I got exhibits A through F, guys. Ladies, I've got exhibits. Individuals going on national TV and saying most of what we do in Washington, D.C. isn't consistent with the Constitution. Most of what we do in Washington, D.C. violates the Constitution. On national TV, I got the exhibit. I'll show it to you here in a bit. What are some other issues? Yes?
The media, the fourth branch of government. There's no balance, and you're talking about education.
Yeah.
This is how our kids get brainwashed, because there's no balance and it's all censored the wrong way.
This is important. The media is important. And you're trying to get me to go down this rabbit hole because I love talking about this issue. I love talking about social media. And I love talking about what many conservatives were doing, yelling at the government to come in and intervene with Zuckerberg and Twitter and do all that, which I was absolutely opposed to. I'm about freedom. And you want the government to come in and solve the problem. And yet what we're seeing happen is what? I think the example of Elon Musk is phenomenal. Yeah. Of someone who's saying, you know what? I'm not waiting for government to come in and solve the problem. I'm going to come in and solve the problem. Right? So you have individuals using resources to go in and solve the problem. And what do we do every time that we look for government to resolve an issue? Government grows bigger. Well, I thought we wanted small government. Every time we have a problem, government go in and take care of that issue. Government grows bigger. Anytime a new law is passed, for the most part, government grows bigger. But we do need to have media. Like, I love that, the way that you said that, fourth branch of government. And who are we going to rely on? This is going to make some of you mad, but I don't want to hear any questions afterwards about this. But this is going to make some of you mad. I have not watched a single episode, if you want to call it that, of Fox News, CNBC, is that what they call it? CNN. I've not watched a single episode in 7 years. I haven't. Right. See? That's why you're mad as heck and not going to take it anymore, and I'm telling you that our best days are ahead. I don't buy into that stuff. Let me tell you something. So I was a talk show host for 5 years down in Arizona. And if you knew what went on behind closed doors, then this won't surprise anybody. But what went on behind closed doors is just all about ratings. It's about ratings. If you want to make it big, it's about ratings, and the competition is heavy. Like anybody goes into radio, they're looking to make it into prime time. And my show was the show in Arizona that preceded Sean Hannity. Now, what happens? Why is it that I don't buy into all this stuff when it comes to media? Because I was told to do certain things. It was all about this. It was appeal to the fear of the individual. Because if you can scare the masses, what do the masses do when they're scared? They come back to the very entity that created the fear in hopes that they'll solve the problem. So you're appealing to an area of the brain, the amygdala, if you want to, I'm not a doctor, but you're appealing to an area of the brain that responds to fear in a certain way, and it keeps them coming back. And then as a talk show host, what can I say? Look at my numbers, the ratings. So listen, I'll admit to you, I'm Pollyanna when it comes to America. I believe our best days are ahead. And I believe the evidence is overwhelming that our best days are ahead, even in light of all the crazy stuff going on. The evidence is overwhelming that our best days are ahead. But that doesn't mean that there's not a battle to be fought. But it does mean, what am I plugging into? What am I plugging into? And so I speak all over the world. I've been down to Mexico, I've been down to Peru, I've been up to Canada, all over the United States. And it's interesting, different perceptions. Perceptions are different because of what we plug into. And I'm not saying be naive. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying it's keeping your ear to the ground and having a barometer for it's almost like a BS barometer, like just understanding kind of what's going on, but having a filter of understanding what's happening out there. Because I just know that most of these individuals on these big news stations, they're not out to tell you exactly what's going on. It's keeping people coming back. It's building numbers. It's dollars. So, okay, media. What else? Is there anything else? Yes?
A misconception of what rights are.
Okay.
So, like a belief that goods and services are rights.
Okay? So what it means to be free. What are rights? Very good. We're going to get into that. Yes?
Legislation that is not pro-family.
Okay? So we're going to talk about legislation in general. So can you give an example? What's an example?
In Washington, in
Chris, not you. You again? You again?
in Virginia, they can go ahead and abort a kid that just got born. Now that's bull. That's murder.
Okay, so listen, and this is speaking along those lines. Does anyone not see what's happening right now? Like Roe v. Wade is about to take a major hit,
Yep.
and I'm a God guy, and I believe liberty is a God thing. And if God wins in the end, I know what wins in the end. I don't know how it all unfolds. I just want to be a warrior on the front lines instead of being distracted by all that's going on. But I see these little things happening. Look at what's happening with Roe v. Wade, with what's about to come down. And then look at out in Florida. Like, I'm ecstatic about finally a governor who's implementing this idea, which we're going to talk about, of nullification. So nullification was a term that Thomas Jefferson coined, which is essentially this idea. The state governments are supposed to hold the line as well. That when the federal government exceeds their authority, it's the function of state governments to say, not in our house, not here, stay in your lane, federal. That's exactly what he's doing. Now, does that end the battle simply because you have a governor saying, hey, you can't come in here and do that? Doesn't end the battle. It begins the process of litigation. Can you imagine, and this is going to happen, mark my words. Down in Arizona, the two leading candidates are running on this platform. Everyone's using DeSantis. They're throwing his name out left and right because they're seeing what he's doing. This is another reason why I have hope. You're going to create a snowball effect. This is about to go down in some pretty interesting ways where you have now state officials from your governor to your attorneys general to your state school boards and local school boards stepping up and saying, we're holding the line. You can't come in here. You have no authority on education. You have no authority to be here. You have no authority to be here. And so this is going to be interesting to watch this unfold. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
A reform in our education for our kids.
Okay.
We let it get to the point where
That-
we're not getting taught the Constitution.
Times two.
And that,
Yeah. So it's educating the masses on what this means. So let's move into some of these ideas. I want to talk first about the outdated idea, and then I want to move in to some general principles that will help you in your day-to-day engagement, and then I want to move into vetting, what that looks like. So yes.
Can I add two more because they're really important? Sorry, the
You can.
income tax, and then also offensive wars, so like non-declared wars that aren't like defensive in nature. So.
Yeah. I mean, we can talk about that. The whole new idea of enumeration of powers. Who has the power to declare war? There's only one entity, Congress. We'll move into that here. So very good. So what I want to do.
Also wanted to kick in religious freedom.
Nice. The board's full now, though, but we did it. So.
I like it. All right. So
and add one more.
Yeah, Don, be quiet. So what I want to do is I want to take you on a little bit of a journey. And if you're taking notes, I'm going to give you some powerful stuff that I've used in debates, that I've used in the college classroom, and show you how fundamental these principles are and how it really crosses party lines. And so, a little bit about my story. So I'm married. My wife is back there. I think some of you met her. She's awesome. Woo-woo! We've been married 28 years. We have 6 kids. Our oldest is 26. Our youngest is 12. 5 boys, girl on the tail end. And we went the conventional route. I ended up going to law school, did my undergrad at Arizona State, and then I went to law school here in not here. That's another school. I went up north to the University of Utah. And then I was a prosecutor for 12 years. I spent the bulk of my career in the gang homicide unit. I then transitioned out. I became a partner with the firm in the Tempe area. And I was a criminal defense consultant for a couple of years and then transitioned out, retired, and said, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But I knew at a very young age. I'm a first-generation American. My mom was born and raised in Switzerland. She came here in 1949, boarded a ship, arrived in New York, in the New York harbor. And my parents raised me with a specific focus on understanding freedom, understanding the Constitution. And at the age of 13, she bought me a book called An Enemy Hath Done This. And I read that book cover to cover. And I remember sitting in my bedroom in Mesa, Arizona, and knowing like I know it, that I was supposed to spend my life defending freedom. Like I knew that's why I was created. It wasn't to be a lawyer. It was to defend these ideas. Now I didn't know how that was going to look, and I didn't know how it was going to unfold. But it's been interesting how one thing after another, one door is opened after another to create partnerships, to unify with others that are looking to do the same thing. It's been an absolutely amazing experience. Well, I spent 15 years in the college classroom, 3 different colleges, and they were all public. And so it's interesting. Sometimes I get the question, how in the world does a guy like you, relatively conservative, more libertarian leaning, like I'm just hands-off type of thing, how did you end up in a public university? Well, that's a good question, right? And the way that I got in was I was decent at engaging the conversation with my students and allowing them to arrive at the right answers. In other words, I didn't go into a classroom, I was not indoctrinating my students. So my students very rarely had any idea where I stood on any particular issue. They would wait for me after class. I'd teach 7 to 10 at night, and it was very rare that I got out of the parking lot before midnight. And so we would just engage with one another. Hey, well, where do you stand on that Second Amendment issue? Man, where do you stand on really freedom of speech? We were debating this. So what would happen in my classroom is I would ask a question. Like we talk about flag burning. We talk about inciting riot. We talk about the unfettered access to the right to bear arms, all these sorts of things. And a student would take a position and say, no, I think that everybody should have access to firearms. And then I would take the position on gun control. Well, why? Look at all the people that are dying. So I would take a position, and all the students would start to jump on board with what I was saying, and then I would switch positions. And I'd switch positions and say, wait a second. And then I'd take this argument, and they were hearing things they'd never heard before. In fact, that was the most common critique. When I would talk to students, they would say this all the time. Why have I never heard these ideas before? Why have I never heard these ideas before? The idea of small government, the idea of freedom. I've never taught them. Well, they were the product of 40,000 hours of compelled education. They'd gone through the public schools. Most of them had never heard these things. I was teaching in the college classroom, and what I had was about 80 to 90% of my students were Obama supporters. They bought into this language of hope and change. And 16 weeks later, my students were attending Ron Paul rallies.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Not because I told them to go, right? Because Campaign for Liberty was a big deal on these college campuses. And they get all excited about liberty, like, oh, we've been duped. And they were running over to these rallies and wanting to be engaged. Why? I never told them what to believe. You don't have to convince people that freedom is the right answer. You just speak the truth, and truth is sweet to the ears. When they hear this idea of being left alone, let me tell you how we'd start every class. And these are some things you'll want to take note on. 3 questions I would ask. Trent?
I want to acknowledge what you just described there. You deserve a hand for that.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Woo, woo. Listen, I'm all about hands. My wife will tell you I'm a words of affirmation guy. Just tell me how great I am, and I just keep going.
Keep on going.
Yeah. So, but I start my class the same way every semester. Constitutional law. And these techniques that I would use are the same techniques I would use over the water cooler. It's the same technique I would use at a Thanksgiving gathering. It's the same technique I would use in just having casual conversation. Because you'll see these questions are very powerful. So I would start, remember, I'm spending 6 weeks with these students. 16 weeks. 16 weeks, 3 hours, 1 night a week. So I got them. I got them for 4 months. Let's go. And so they come into a class, they're expecting to learn about the Constitution, and the class is constitutional law. And I would ask a couple questions as we get started. Say, hey, listen, I want to know, how many of you here want to be left alone? How many want to decide, you get to decide how you live your life and nobody else? How many agree with that? Do you know in 15 years of teaching at the college level, I had never had one student disagree with that? And yet most of the students coming into my classroom were not conservative. They weren't. Their mind wasn't oriented around liberty. They had a pretty warped idea about the way the world operates. They had no clue on freedom, but yet they believed in a principle that across the board people agree on. So I've been out to Columbia University. They were ready to hang me. Chris, you might have been there. They were ready to hang me. I'm 600 students in that auditorium, ready to talk about this outdated Constitution. The first question I asked was, who here wants to be left alone? Every single student's hand went up in that auditorium. Guys, so often we're fighting about bad ideas versus good ideas, and we're beginning to establish a firm foundation in what brings us together. Because I think it's time to unite on a cause and stop dividing on differences. And yet, what is it that the media wants us to divide on differences? Right? You're black, you're white, so you should fight. You're rich, you're poor, you should fight. All these sorts of things. When we all agree as human beings on this idea that we want to be left alone. So watch what happens. I'd ask question number 2. Who here believes government should follow the rules? In 15 years, I never had one student argue with me about that. Not even at Columbia. They're like, yeah. Now, do they understand what the rule book is? No, there we go. So now I got an in. Now we're about to take care of some business. Right? They had no idea what the rule book was. But intuitively, they understand, yeah, government should follow the rules. And then I'd ask the third question. Who here believes that you should be able to keep what you earn? Now, I have to admit here, the overwhelming majority, 99% of my students over 15 years would raise their hand to that. Occasionally I'd have 1 or 2 or 3 that would raise their hand and say, I don't know that I agree with that. Tell me what you don't agree with. Well, man, listen, you don't need to make more than $250,000. Like they come up with these arbitrary numbers. Like, what do you mean? And so we talk through this and say, so of course they were about the redistribution of wealth. And so I'd ask the question, or I'd make a request. Listen, I know that it's not cheap to go here. So, and I know you got some money in your wallet, you got some things in your backpack. So what I'd like you to do is, bring up those phones, bring up those laptops, throw some money up here from your wallet. And when we're done here, I'll march with you. We'll go down, we'll pawn these things off, and we'll gather the money, and we'll give that money to groups, to people that you think are worthy of it. I promise I'll do this with you. So I'll wait. How many do you think in 15 years brought anything up to this darn podium? Not one. Why? Because it's a cute idea until it applies to you. Right? That socialism is silly. Right? These are silly ideas. And these students, right, they think that they're taking the moral high ground. Right? Because I will say that about these college students. I think it's, as a general rule, human beings are like that. But these college students come in and they want to take the moral high ground. They think that's the moral high ground. But when you describe it as theft, oh, I guess it's not the moral high ground anymore, right? You don't get to choose what you do. Who are you going to get? Well, I'm going to get the government to do that. Oh, so force. We're going to use force to do that. That's stealing. And so it was amazing. And so what would happen is we would start to move through these various topics. We went comprehensively through the Constitution. We dive into the First Amendment, free speech and assembly and religion and press. We'd move into the Second Amendment. We'd move into the Fourth Amendment, my favorite, the right to be left alone. We'd move into all these things, and we'd dive into a specific fact pattern. Like I'd talk about real cases. And a student would chime in and say something, and I'd let him kind of go about doing his thing, and then I'd say, wait a second, hold on. You're taking a position that I understand and I respect, but I have to ask. Don't you remember me asking you a couple questions on the first day of class? Yes, I remember that. Do you remember the one question when I asked you, do you want to be left alone? Yeah, I remember that. Do you remember what you said? He says, yeah, I said I want to be left alone. Excellent. Do you remember the second question I asked? I asked you about government following the rules. Do you remember what you answered on that question? Yeah, I said government should follow the rules. I said, well, sir, here's what's happening. You're now taking a position that is now telling other people what to do, and it's in contradiction to the rule book. Can you help us understand why you're now switching positions 6 weeks into the course? Oh, that's not what I meant. Let me tell you what I meant. Guys, see, this is the truth is sweet to the ears. You don't need to convince anybody, right? You just speak the truth. You speak fundamental principles of liberty. Now, so those were very powerful and a lot of fun. And by the way, in terms of debate, I love to debate. But it's not; those aren't forms that I'm generally looking for, unless I got someone that will bring an audience to the table. So if you go to YouTube, you'll see a couple of debates against college professors, one against a individual who's running for Congress, and these were fun. They were a lot of fun. Why? Because they were bringing people that had never heard these ideas before. Now I have access to an audience I'd never probably have access to otherwise, and I'm talking about being left alone. And these guys are down there like, I want to be left alone. I'm with this guy. Yeah. And government following the rules. I'm with this guy. Yeah. This guy's creating all kinds of new stuff that's not even in the rule book. Right? It was amazing. And so as someone who enjoys the debate, as a general rule, I'm not spending my time debating with individuals that maybe are on the far right or far left, a small percentage of the population that are never going to change their mind. I would only debate those individuals on one condition. I have an audience. If you have an audience, then it's worth your time. But I'm focused on the 80%. Right, the individuals on social media, the people that I'm interacting with daily, that can be influenced. Right, they just need to be brought back to that foundation. But this was another thing that I was dealing with day to day, was this idea of an outdated constitution. The overwhelming majority of my students would come in and I would ask them about, hey, is the Constitution relevant today? It's not. Why not? Well, the guys who wrote it, they're old. Well, they're dead. They were white and they owned slaves. Like it's not a relevant document. So that's your criteria. Yes, that's my criteria. So if I were to bring in Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler to stand here in front of you, and they were to tell you killing is wrong, you would question whether or not they were telling you the truth. Well, no, it's not. No, it actually is that way, right? The truth doesn't depend on the virtue of the person speaking it, right? The truth is truth. And so tell me in the Constitution where you're concerned. Well, they had never read the document. Because they were being told in high school it's old and outdated by who? By teachers that went through the same system that were being told by individuals who didn't know what they were talking about that it was old, outdated, archaic, and evil. It was just a nasty cycle. So what would you say on this outdated side? Is this a document that's relevant today? Yes.
So
by the way, you're recording this?
I am.
Are you zooming this out?
No.
You're just recording.
It'll be on my YouTube channel.
How you doing?
Doing
I just
great.
want to say hi.
So,
Yeah.
hello to everyone.
Yes.
So I think a lot of the founders were very astute in that they saw that government would grow, and they put a lot of fail-safes in there. But and I think that most people, when they make the argument that it's outdated, are kind of coming from they don't like aspects of the Constitution, and so they're trying to use that as a way to just to put that out there. But what do you think of Lysander Spooner in his book Constitution of No Authority, kind of making the argument that the Constitution is outdated because none of us were even alive at the time the document was signed, so it's not like a binding document at all for any of us, so he that's what his whole book is actually about.
Section 1. The Constitution has no inherent authority or obligation. It has no authority or obligation at all, unless as a contract between man and man. And it does not so much as even purport to be a contract between persons now existing. It purports, at most, to be only a contract between persons living 80 years ago, and it can be supposed to have been a contract then only between persons who had already come to years of discretion, so as to be competent to make reasonable and obligatory contracts. Furthermore, we know historically that only a small portion even of the people then existing were consulted on the subject, or asked or permitted to express either their consent or dissent in any formal manner. Those persons, if any, who did give their consent formally are all dead now. Most of them have been dead 40, 50, 60, or 70 years, and the Constitution, so far as it was their contract, died with them. They had no natural power or right to make it obligatory on their children. It is not only plainly impossible in the nature of things that they could bind their posterity, but they did not even attempt to bind them. That is to say, the instrument does not purport to be an agreement between anybody but the people then existing, nor does it, either expressly or impliedly, assert any right, power, or disposition on their part to bind anybody but themselves. Let us see. Its language is, "We the people of the United States," that is, the people then existing in the United States, "in order to form a more perfect union, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." It is plain in the first place that this language, as an agreement, purports to be only what it at most really was, that is, a contract between the people then existing, and of necessity, binding as a contract only upon those then existing.
So what are your thoughts on Spooner?
So I'll tell you an example, a real-world example I had with the Georgetown law professor.
Okay.
So he went on national TV a decade ago, was featured in Time magazine as well, and went on and said, hey, this document is outdated, it's archaic, it's evil, it's time to move on. So what did I do in response to that TV deal I saw? I was working with Glenn Beck at the time. I flew my sorry rear end out unannounced to Washington, D.C., and I went over to Georgetown. I went to the front office and I said, I asked for the professor. They told me he was on the second floor. I marched up to the second floor and I knocked on the door and he was there. We spent the next 2 hours together. Super nice individual. And I said, listen, we're going to do something fun. I said, we have resources to do something. We're going to do a 3-day event here at Georgetown. He's like, here? Yeah, Georgetown. We're going to do this. Well, what are we going to do? It's going to be we're going to make it's going to be a festival. We're going to bring in groups from different varying backgrounds, and they'll just allow individuals to kind of set up booths and do that thing. But the event's going to culminate with what? It's going to culminate with a debate. He says about what? About the Constitution. Who's the debate going to be between? Me and you. He says, I'll get back to you. 6 weeks later, he got back to me, and what did he say?
No.
I'm not interested. So, and the reason why, and listen, we could go through some of those things. We're not going to spend a lot of time going through that, but I think this is important that you have a working knowledge of this, that you feel comfortable with this, because I've dealt with this question quite a bit. I remember when I was a radio talk show host, being on air and having someone call in and say, hey, this document's outdated, it's time to move on. Like, yeah, you're living in the past, Krauser, move on, like this makes some progress. And I simply asked the question. I said, can you tell me where in the document it's outdated? Give me one provision that's outdated. One provision. And then I marched through a number of things. I said, is it the 13th Amendment that abolishes slavery? Are you telling me that's outdated? Is it the 15th Amendment that says you can't stop a person from voting based on their race? Or the 19th Amendment based on their gender? Are those outdated ideas? Or maybe it's the 14th Amendment that says equal protection under the law, that the government doesn't get to pick winners and losers. Is that outdated? Or is it the 8th Amendment that says, hey, no cruel and unusual punishment, that when the government mounts its resources and ultimately convicts someone, you can't utilize cruel and unusual measures? Is that outdated?
Yes.
Yeah, you did. So what about the Article 5 process? Amend it. Is that outdated? Oh, and then what about the 6th Amendment that talks about the right to a fair trial, a speedy trial, a public trial, the right to confront your witnesses, the right to compel your own witnesses to come in and testify on your behalf? Are those outdated? What about the 5th Amendment that says you have a right to silence, and that silence can't be used as ammunition against you in a trial? Is it the 2nd Amendment that says you have a right to defend yourself? Is it the 1st Amendment that talks about free speech and free assembly and free exercise of religion? Is that outdated? Or maybe you're talking about the 7 articles of the document that basically limit government, that ensures that they don't abuse their authority. So tell me where in the document it's outdated. And so I waited for an answer, and of course I got a dial tone. Right? Done. But this document's more relevant today than it's ever been. For someone to suggest otherwise is a bit silly. So let's talk about this. How many articles are in the Constitution? Not 3, not 13.
That's 7.
Oh, is that? I thought it was a gang sign. You were bringing me back to my gang days. Bro. Yeah. What is it? What? 7. Okay. 7 articles. Okay. How many amendments? 27 amendments. Now, if you're taking notes, I'd ask you to jot some things down. I'm about to give you something very powerful. In fact, what I'm about to give you is not understood by 95% of the population. There are 7 articles. We're not going to go through each of them in detail. My hope is that you'll dive into this and start to understand it and implement it. But Article 1, what does Article 1 speak to? What branch of government? Legislative branch. That is the article that speaks to the legislative branch. It enumerates their power and authority. I'm going to show you how powerful this is. Article 2 speaks to what branch? Executive. And Article 3 speaks to which? Judicial. Here's what I want you to remember. LEJ. Just remember LEJ. Now, I would invite you to dive in again and start to understand some of these things, but here's how powerful this is. Now, I'm going to give you a pamphlet here in just a moment, a booklet that I put together that will be really helpful. But when I'm talking to somebody, whether it's someone running for office, we have an organization that we started about 6 months ago. We have a couple hundred people coming every week, and we allow individuals running for office to come in. And the questions will blow you away. In fact, I'm going to give you an example of many of those questions here. But you'd have someone come in running for Congress, and they would start talking about a piece of legislation that they're going to move forward with. And the question was this: where in Article 1 do you have the authority to do that? Hey, the president's doing this. This is a great idea. Well, hold on. Where in Article 2 does the president have the power to do this? Because remember, the Constitution, what is the purpose of the Constitution? It's the rule book. It's to limit government. Hold on, Trent. Why is it important to limit government? Don't laugh. I'm being serious.
Our circumstance here is laughable because we have such a bloated government. We're all going,
Okay.
what
Yes.
the heck can we do?
So why do we need a limited government?
Because they come and they'll tax us to death. They'll take away our rights. They want to enslave us.
Okay.
Tax
So
slaves.
they'll leave us alone.
Okay, very good. Go back to the basic principle. But remember, the whole idea, So we're talking about this idea of being left alone, and you're talking about government becoming big, right? James Madison in the Federalist Paper number 5, he said, if men were angels, there would be no need for government. Right? He said, if men were angels, there would be no need for government. What's he talking about? He's saying men with power will abuse it. They'll engage in unrighteous dominion. They'll trample over the fundamental liberties of the people. And even kids understand this. I've been into scores of elementary schools, junior high schools, and high schools. And I'll bring up a popular kid, someone that's, their student body president or vice president, that everybody loves. And I'll ask questions about, you like this guy? Yeah, they go nuts. Y'all have any problems with him deciding when you come to school on a daily basis? If we gave him that authority, no problem. What about when you leave? I'd have no problem. Why? Because they're thinking he'll always come late. Maybe not even come at all. Like, yeah, we're all about this guy. Would you be okay with him deciding what you eat for lunch? Hands start to go down. Are you okay with him deciding when you go to the bathroom? Hands start to go down. What about him deciding when you're going to do your homework and what that homework will consist of? Hands start to go down. Why? And you start asking, they understand this principle of men with power and what they will do. They will eventually abuse it. Even George Washington understood this, didn't he? They wanted him to be a king. He's like, I'm not going to do this. He understood his own nature, that what we tend to do with power. And so limited government is designed not to restrain the people. It's designed to restrain the government as they go about doing what? What's the job of government?
People.
Okay, to do what? Protect the people, but narrow it in. More.
Protect our rights.
To protect our rights. So when you look at the Constitution, what's the foundation of the Constitution?
Declaration.
Okay, let me ask you a little bit different. There's a document that in order to understand the Constitution, you must read it through the lens of this document. What's the foundational document of our Constitution? Declaration of Independence. Okay? Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence tells us what our philosophy of government is. The philosophy of our American government is this. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among those being life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. It then goes on to tell us that government's job is to do that, to secure those rights. And it tells us that governments are instituted among, who's doing it, whose job is it to put the government in place? Where does the power derive from? Me and you, the people. So you have a Declaration of Independence that tells us what the foundation is to this Constitution. And if fundamental liberty is the foundation, if it's ultimately what it's about, and you're going to have a Constitution in place, you must have one that's limited. And I think we have a big problem in our society, among the general public, along with those that are in office, that say, hey, I can do anything I want so long as the Constitution forbids it. Is that an accurate statement? I'm going to ask this again. Is that an accurate statement? Can Congress, the President, the court do anything they want so long as the Constitution doesn't forbid it? No. No. Yes, guys, this is important. So these 3 articles, this is important language because it's enumerating the specific power of each of those branches of government. So in other words, if the power to engage in some sort of legislation is not there, they don't have that power. So the 10th Amendment, if you're jotting notes, the 10th Amendment is kind of a matching bookend here. It says, listen carefully, those powers that we haven't given to the federal government remain with the states and the people. You remember me talking about this idea of nullification? That's the idea. Is the 10th Amendment says, those powers, federal government, that we haven't given to you remain with us, the states. And now you have individuals in office who are saying, wait a second, federal government, you're stepping into an area that's outside of your lane. You do not have this authority. Therefore, you are not permitted to act in our state. And now the litigation begins. This is what they're talking about. This is a solid understanding of the 10th Amendment. Right? That's exactly what's going on. And so asking these questions is important. See, I don't care if a good idea is, and I don't think you should either. I don't care if an idea is a good idea or a bad idea until I've established first that it's constitutional, that it's permissible. So Department of Education. I know we talk about, is the Department of Education...
No.
Abolish it.
Yeah. So when you look, by the way, does anybody have their Constitution here?
It's in my car.
You may not ever leave your Constitution in your car again.
It was in my pocket, but
Yeah.
I put it on my
Yeah. So there it is. So if you look, just when you get a chance, guys, this is This is very empowering because I think so many people, when they look at the Constitution, they're thinking, man, it's a boring dual document. Now, this is a document that's, you don't need to go to law school. In fact, if you go to law school, you'll become even more confused about what the thing says, right? But all you got to do is, for example, Article 1, Section 8 is kind of a go-to. Article 1, Section 8 is this. All of the enumerated powers of the legislature at the federal level are enumerated there. They're all enumerated there. There's about 18 of them. And if it's not enumerated there, the federal government has no power. Specifically, the legislative branch has no power to legislate in that regard. So there's nothing about education in the Constitution. What does that mean? Where does the power? It's a state issue. Yet, listen, we have individuals that are running as Republicans in Arizona. They come to our forum. We have an individual, he's been in office for 20 years, various offices, from Attorney General to Superintendent of Public Instruction. I asked him the question. I said, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, that you do not believe that the Department of Education is an entity that is justified under Article 1. In other words, there's no authority. Yes, I agree with that. So as the Superintendent of Public Instruction, what will you do to sever our ties at the state level with what it is the federal government starts wanting to do? Because what we want in Arizona, and you want it in Utah, is we want to run our own show. We want to run our own show. And he told me, this was his answer. It's on film. There's too much money coming in. Too much money coming in. Guys, but how are we going to fix this thing if you don't have individuals with a backbone that will say at some point someone's got to sever the ties? Like, I hope this doesn't rub anybody the wrong way, but I'm a big Ron Paul guy. Like, Ron Paul is really, when I'm looking for a Ron Paul. Like, I'm looking for a George Washington, someone who understands it. That's really my barometer when I'm looking at someone who's running for office. Do you understand limited government? Think about this. This is a guy that was in office for 30 years. They called him Dr. No for a reason. He never passed one piece of legislation. He basically, everything that came across his desk, I ain't voting for this. Number one, there's no authority. And number two, it makes government bigger. Dr. No, like that. Instead of looking for all of these individuals coming in and telling us about, hey, they want to be your next representative, and you say, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to pass this law, and this. Done. Hey, what laws are you going to get rid of? Like, that's what I want to know. So think about this. I'm fired up, by the way. Think about this. So 250 bureaucracies. There's 250 bureaucracies that pass about 6,000 different regulations every year onto the American people. Is a regulation a piece of legislation?
No.
Yeah, it is. Okay, it's not technically legislation, but is it forcing individuals to do certain things or else? Yes. So in that regard, it's legislation. Who is the only entity that has the legislative power?
Congress.
Guys, it says in Article 1, Section 1. Note this down. Article 1, Section 1 says this. All legislative powers herein granted are vested in who? Vested in Congress, the House, and the Senate. I don't read anything about all legislative powers herein granted are vested in the House and the Senate and the other bureaucracies that they might see fit. It doesn't say anything about that. When something is vested, that's a term of art. So when something's vested, if I vest something within you, you have no power to give it away. And yet what we have with 250 bureaucracies passing 600 different regulations on the American people, are they accountable to anybody? No. See, what I'd like to hear is individuals running at the federal level who are going to, what are you going to do to get rid of some of these? What are you going to do to make government smaller? And I'm not pretending this is any small task. It's one reason I'm going to get some people mad at me. It's one reason why I'm opposed to term limits. What I'd like to see is a bunch of Ron Pauls get into office and spend the 8, 12, 16 years that it's going to take to turn this thing upside down. You don't get someone in there for 2 years, 4 years, and think you're going to turn this thing. It took 100 years to create this mess. Okay, I don't want to go. We're not going down that debate yet. I just wanted to get under your skin a little bit. All right. So, but this is powerful. Same thing with the executive. Does anybody know how many grants of authority are given to the president? You got 18 here in Article 1, Section 8. You got 6. 6. That's all he has. So the idea, the original intent, was that this office, the executive branch, was supposed to be the weakest. Today, it's the strongest. So these are issues. So taking us back to the foundational principles of the Constitution, I talked about those 3 issues of where we stand, and what brings us together is this idea of being left alone, government following the rules, and keeping what you earn. But what is the primary reason? If I could sum up the Constitution in 2 phrases, it would be this. Men and women are born free. And men and women, hey, was that on? Oh,
Not yet.
oh, sorry.
Well, we're working on
Men
it.
and women are born free, and men and women cannot be trusted with power. That's your Constitution in a nutshell, guys. Like, let's not make this thing difficult. The idea is, American philosophy is men and women are born free, and men and women power cannot be trusted. But if you're going to have government, listen, you kind of see this struggle going on. Well, men and women with power cannot be trusted. Well, let's not have government. Anarchy is not a better solution.
Yes,
Anarchies always evolve
I
into
disagree.
oligarchies.
I
Always.
disagree.
You can't give one example of an anarchy evolving into anything other than oligarchy. So, if you buy into this idea of the Constitution, and that government is a necessary evil, then you've got to have limited power because of this, right? So let's talk about this just real briefly. Article 4, anybody know what Article 4 speaks to? It's a state issue, and it's reminding us that every state is guaranteed a Republican form of government. Republican with a small r.
Okay, yeah.
I always get people coming back. Why are you advocating a Republican form of government? I don't know, because the Constitution says it.
Yeah.
No, it's Republican small r. So a Republican form of government, every state is guaranteed this. Now, what is the difference between a Republican form of government and a democracy? Yes.
In a republic, you have certain unalienable rights.
Okay. And democracy is mob rule, right? So think about this just as an example. Donald, you have a horse, don't you?
No,
You had a horse.
I always wish I had a horse.
Yeah. Who has a horse? What kind of horse? What color?
White.
Yeah, that's right. She actually stole my white horse. She doesn't have it anymore because she eventually paid the consequences. But she had my white horse. She takes off in the distance, and we as a townspeople take off after her. We bring her back to town, and of course, in our town, what do we do with horse thieves? But Chris would say, hang them high. Right? So what's that? Not the horse. Darlene, what just happened? That's a democracy. All those in favor of hanging Darlene, raise your hand. Don't pretend like you wouldn't vote for that. Sure. Because we don't deal with that in our community. So guys, that's the democracy. See, here's a republic. Darlene steals the horse. She's rounded up, brought back to town. I make my case to the people and say, all those in favor of hanging, raise your hand. And then who shows up?
Sheriff.
The executive branch. The sheriff, law enforcement says you can't hang this person. Now, the member of the executive branch might not like Darlene. He might live in the same community. Might not like Darlene. It doesn't matter. It's equal protection under the law. It's an equal application. And so he says you can't hang Darlene because Darlene has rights. She has a right to a fair trial, a speedy trial, a public trial. She has a right to confront witnesses being brought against her, and she even has a right to bring in her own witnesses. She has a right to remain silent. You can't use that silence against her. And you know what she also has? She also has a right to an impartial jury, and none of you buckaroos are sitting on that jury. You all voted to hang her. You're not sitting on this jury. Guys, you see what's happening here? That's a Republican form of government. So often we talk about the difference between a democracy and a republic is, well, people represent us. That, when you read the founders, that's a small part of what they were talking about. The representative government was the smallest part of a Republican form of government. A Republican form of government is designed to protect even the small guy. You have 1,000 Mormons living in a community. Hey, we're going to show up with a ballot box and say only the principles of the church can be practiced in our town. A Buddhist moves into town.
Yes.
A Republican form of government says, sorry, that law is invalid. Let's take a look at something. We're going to look at some stuff and have some fun with this. So what I'm going to show you first, this is an interview on national TV with Andrew Napolitano. Everybody familiar with Andrew Napolitano?
Yeah.
Okay, so he's a Fox. I don't know if he's on Fox anymore. Anybody know?
No, I think he got pushed.
Okay. So he's interviewing Jim Clyburn. And this is right around the time of the health care bill. Guys, I want you to listen very carefully. This is on national TV. Let's listen.
There you go.
Let me finish the principle here, because this is important. The whole idea of Republican form of government, guys, this is key. What we saw go on for the last couple of years, the last decade. was something that was antagonistic to a Republican form of government. Do you all remember the case that came down where it was the baker who said, I don't want to bake a cake?
Yeah.
Yep.
Or the photographer that I don't want to take pictures at a gay wedding?
Yep.
Do you remember all that stuff went down? And what did the government do? The government went after them.
Yep.
Went after them. It was a disregard of private property. It was a disregard of allowing businesses to run their business as they see fit. Right? We even saw it with many of my conservative, liberty-loving friends were wanting to shut down Costco because they were making people wear masks. Don't go there. Right? I'm a private property guy. Why? Because John Adams says this: the moment a society does not hold private property laws at the same level as the sacred laws of God, tyranny and anarchy will commence. And so what we had was individuals that didn't understand the principle, quite frankly, saying, we're going to go in and shut these guys down. I'm like, let them do what they want. Because what should happen in a free society is society should be able to march with their feet. So I was on NBC Nightly News when this whole thing went down with the baker. Remember the baker, baker and the photographer? There were several other examples. Because we passed a law in Arizona that said we're going to protect the private business owner. If they have a religious excuse, we're going to protect that reason. You don't leave your religion and your fundamental beliefs at the door because you decide to start a business. So that was put in place. Well, the media shows up because there's a group of people that's protesting down the Capitol. So NBC Nightly News and all these national media outlets show up, and the legislature in Arizona ran for the hills. They did not want to defend this. Because why? Because they were concerned about the allegation of what? You're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a misogynist. You're all those things. How do you defend against those things? So I said, I'd love to talk with you. So they come down to my office and we had a discussion. And of course, initially the allegation is, man, you stand behind this legislation? No, I stand behind freedom. Freedom's the answer. What's the question? That's where I stand. And I said, here's the deal. When I say that I'm all about defending the private property rights of certain individuals, I'm not suggesting that what they're doing is morally right. I'm just suggesting they have the right to do it. So when an individual decides that they want to bake cakes and they don't want to serve a certain community, let the community vote with their feet. If Costco says, hey, this is the way you have to behave to come into our store, let the community vote with their feet. That's freedom first. And so I switched around. I said, hey, just so we're clear on this whole idea of bigotry, I said, let's imagine you have a cab driver. He owns the cab company, and he's a single driver. It's a small little outfit, and the driver is gay, and the taxi's hailed, and he pulls over, and the guy gets in the car and he says, "Where are you going?" And he tells the taxi driver, "I'm going down to the Capitol." And the taxi driver says, "Why are you going to the Capitol?" And he says, "I'm going down. There's a rally going on." And he says, "What kind of rally is this?" He says, "Oh yeah, we're opposed to the LGBT community." And so we're making our stance very clear. And the gay taxi driver says, "Get out." He should be able to do that. Yep. See, so it's not about being a bigot. It's not about being a racist or a misogynist. It's about standing for freedom. And what do you think the guy who's got a narrative of, well, we're going to go expose these bigots? What does he do now? Right? Because I just offended the very entity that you say I'm opposed to. No, I'm for freedom. I'm for freedom. It doesn't matter who it is. Freedom's the answer. What's the question? Of course, that's good times. So, guys, that's the idea of a republic, is protecting even the small guy, even protecting when the majority say, we don't like this. No, we defend it anyway. So let's take a look at this.
Where in the Constitution is the federal government charged with maintaining people's health?
Well, that's not in the Constitution. That's not in the Constitution that says the federal government has got anything to do with most of the stuff that we do. The federal government's got nothing in the Constitution to do with education.
Did you guys hear this? Guys, this is on national TV. This is the third highest ranking Democrat. And by the way, for me, it doesn't matter if they have an R behind their name or a D. I'm an equal opportunity hater. I mean, it just doesn't matter. If it's Trump, that's not following the rule of law, or if it's Biden, it doesn't matter to me. Like you either stand for freedom or you don't. It's not about who's in office. It's my allegiance is to the Constitution. My allegiance is to freedom. It's to no man other than my Heavenly Father. That's it. Outside of that, I don't like. Do I want to support certain people? Yeah, follow the rules. But once you deviate from the rules, it's our duty. It's our obligation to call those individuals out and hold them accountable, as someone said, Chris, the guy likes to hang people, right? Hold them accountable. All right, we're going to play this again.
Where in the Constitution is the federal government charged with maintaining people's health?
Well, that's not in the Constitution. That's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has got anything to do with most of the stuff that we do. The federal government got nothing in the Constitution to do with education. But I'll tell you what, if the federal government has not stepped into education, I don't think my parents have ever gotten one. My father was denied a high school education because of state law. The federal government had to step in and say, you cannot do that to African Americans.
Well, it was the federal courts that stepped in, thanks be to God, that caused you to get the education you did. But if the Constitution doesn't authorize the federal government to have a Department of Education or to take care of people's health care, what's the sense of having it? You took an oath to uphold the Constitution. You can't go outside the Constitution because you think it's a good thing to do without violating that oath.
How should be where in the Constitution it prohibits the federal government from doing this?
Well, the 10th Amendment says that which we don't give you, the powers that the states haven't given to the feds, are retained to the states.
Yes, but that's the 10th Amendment. However, the fact still remains that the Constitution, as almost every justice will tell you, is in fact a living document. The Constitution upheld Dred Scott's enslavement in 1850.
Anyway, he then proceeds to deviate, but the main point is made. Right? Most of what we do in Washington, D.C., right? We're not following the rule book there. Guys, this is most people. We got an election cycle going on, and we're about to send a bunch of people to D.C. that believe kind of these same ideas. Republicans and Democrats alike that believe in this idea of we can do whatever we want. It's a problem. So let's hit on this fundamental rights, and then the last half hour, we're going to dive deep into some things that I think are going to be very empowering for you. Yep. Yes, go ahead.
Do you want the lapel mic working or
no?
No, you're good.
No.
Okay, keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right.
So let's go over to. Listen to this. This is Phil Hare out of Illinois. I want you to listen to how he engages a few of these people.
And I can't. Well, I know, but still, I'm trying to finish the point. And the point is that for me. When a little boy,
Yes, I know.
well, this is important stuff. These are people's lives. It's people's children. It's when you take your child to the hospital and you think it's really bad, and your heart is bumping and bumping and bumping and bumping while you're waiting for the doctor to tell you what it is, and then the doctor comes out and says it's going to be okay, except you don't have insurance and you're stuck with a $10,000 or $15,000 bill, and your heart starts pumping. And what am I going to do? I talked to a woman that does bankruptcies, a good friend of mine that's an attorney. Monday before I left, I said to her,
"What's happening with the economy?
well, look, we've got to turn this.
More doctors.
Where in the Constitution? We are going to. I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest.
That's my.
Well,
that's right.
Jackpot, brother. Oh, keep what I care more about. I care more about the people that are dying every day that don't have health care.
You care more about that than the U.S. Constitution that you swore to uphold.
I believe that it says we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Okay.
Tell me. It doesn't matter to me. Well, either one.
We know it does. It clearly doesn't matter to you. It's so clear that it doesn't matter to you. It's unbelievably clear.
You wouldn't know what matters to me. You wouldn't know.
It's unbelievably clear that the Constitution doesn't matter to you, sir.
Oh,
you just said it 2 seconds ago.
You're going to ask me. Well, ask me. What's the question again?
Where in the Constitution does it give you the authority to?
I don't know.
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Guys,
What this bill does.
hold on. That's crazy. These are the kind of people that we're electing.
Who was that guy?
That was Phil Hare out of Illinois.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but notice the things that he's saying. Like, there's no accountability. 150 years ago, you would have been booted out of office pretty quickly to admit that you were not following the oath of office. Right. So let's one more principle here. This is on fundamental rights. I want you to hear what's being said on fundamental rights. So this is Senator Tom Harkin. And listen to him talk about the fundamental right to health care.
Didn't. What this bill does is we finally take that step, as our leader said earlier. We take that step from health care as a privilege to health care as an inalienable right of every single American citizen. As I said before, this bill is not complete. I've used the analogy of a starter. and which we can add additions and enhancements as we go into the future. But like every right that we've ever passed for the American people, we revisit it later on.
All right. Are there any problems with this?
Everything.
His last statement, like every right that we give to the American people, what is wrong with that? Yeah. Government does.
Got the cart before the horse.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. You know what that's code for? Let me tell you what Thomas Jefferson really meant. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Shane Krauser's writing it. Every idiot can understand what I'm about to say. Right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by God. It doesn't say endowed by government. It doesn't say endowed by a piece of paper. It says endowed by their creator. That those fundamental freedoms exist by virtue of our humanity. So when he talks about health care, is health care a fundamental right? No. Well, why not?
It's an entity. It's a private.
It's a service.
But don't I have a right to health care?
No more than you have a
Wait,
right to food.
do I have a right to food?
No.
Yes.
Who says I have a right to food?
You have a right to go get food.
Ooh, man, you guys are sharp. Do you have a right to water?
No.
Do you have a right to, never mind.
Oh, if it's
This is
raining,
good.
if it's
Yeah.
raining,
What about the right to housing?
No.
Right to health. By the way, the South African Constitution, what does it say? You look at their Declaration of Rights, it says that the people have a fundamental right to water, food, health care, and housing.
Oh, great.
Yes, you can look it up for yourself. What is that? Why is that problematic? Because that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be free. And when you think about inalienable rights, here's what I want you to think about. Think about being out in the desert by yourself. You're out in this, right? You're out in the middle of nowhere by yourself. What do you have the fundamental right to do? What can you do? You can walk, you can sleep, you can go hunt for food, you can go round up the water, you can do any of those things. Those are fundamental liberties. You don't have a right to have someone come and serve you the water or food. So think about this. If we had the fundamental right to food, guess where we'd be going afterwards? Ruth's Chris. You guys have a Ruth's Chris here? I'd walk in and say, thank you very much after I eat the great steak and say, I really appreciate this. They're like, aren't you going to pay? No, I just went to this Constitution seminar and learned I have the fundamental right to food. Thank you very much. Right? That doesn't work. You know, it's just the same thing when it comes to health care. Health care requires a third party. Anything that requires a third party to assist in the execution of what we're calling a right is not a right at all. So when I'm talking about health care, what do I need in order to have that thing happen? I need doctors that are going to be compelled at the point of the gun to provide a service. So I walk into a doctor's office and I say, I have the fundamental right to health care, you're going to provide it. You're forcing him to do something that he is otherwise not obligated to do. That is not a fundamental right. Health care is a privilege, and if you want to go out and negotiate and contract for that service, you are certainly able to. It'd be like saying you have a fundamental right to lawyering services. Oh, so at the point of a gun, you're going to make lawyers represent? That's just not the way it works. And so we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be free. And so let's go over, we're going to watch this one here. This is Obama 2014 State of the Union Address. See if we can get this one up.
US President Barack Obama has pledged to bypass a divided Congress and take action on his own to bolster America's middle class in his latest State of the Union address. The annual policy statement reflected his frustration with Republican lawmakers who've either watered down or blocked past initiatives.
What I offer tonight is a set of concrete, practical proposals to speed up growth, strengthen the middle class, and build new ladders of opportunity into the middle class. Some require congressional action, and I am eager to work with all of you. But America does not stand still, and neither will I. So wherever and whenever I can take steps without legislation to expand opportunity for more American families, that's what I'm going to do.
And the reaction was
the
reaction was a standing ovation. Basically telling who has the exclusive power to legislate. Congress, right here. And you have someone standing up and saying, you know what, I'll bypass that process. I've got a pen and a phone, and yet you have half of Congress standing up giving a standing ovation.
So this is how liberty dies. With thunderous applause.
And basically saying, yeah, that's our power, but go ahead and steal it. In fact, I've got evidence that they have no problem with the president stealing. You ready for this? This is Exhibit D, maybe E. This is a congresswoman talking about how they're going to bypass the legislative process.
And so we have a dream that is attainable, Mr. Conyers, and as well, we will be answering the call of all of America because people need work and we're not doing right by them by creating work. I believe this caucus will put us on the right path, and we'll give President Obama a number of executive orders that he can sign with pride and strength. In fact, I think that should be our #1 agenda. Let's write up these executive orders, draft them, of course, and ask the president to stand with us on full employment. Thank you all for organizing this caucus.
Guys, that should infuriate everybody sitting in here. This is a direct violation of the Constitution. We're going to bypass the legislative process. She's a legislator. We're going to bypass that process. It's not going to go through the House. It's not going to go through the Senate. We're going to send it directly to the executive branch to sign off and create law. But the people get what they deserve. Like, we've created this. Like, no one was up in arms. You didn't have the masses up in arms about this. No one hardly said a thing about it. Oh, okay, well, I guess they're doing what they're permitted to do. We got to fight back doing the same thing when we get our guy in office.
So are executive orders legal?
So executive orders, there are two types of executive orders in a nutshell. Executive order #1 is when the president is issuing orders with things that he does have jurisdiction over. So let's say that war has been declared. War has been declared. He can issue executive orders on how to execute that war. In putting together his committees and doing all that sort of thing. Under Article 2, he can issue orders on how to direct those things. But these aren't the kind of executive orders that we're talking about. An executive order that amounts to legislation is illegal. Right? These are executive orders that she's talking about. If you dive in deep enough, right, they're talking about creating jobs and doing this and doing that. Right? You're actually pushing pieces of legislation, and she knew that she could never get it through the congressional route, the constitutional route, so we're just going to do this.
So are there states that have just rejected executive orders?
Well, that's where nullification comes in, right? So you kind of see how this is all playing out. You have Congress doing certain things, putting potentially laws into place either by way of an executive order or by way of the constitutional process. Constitutional process being that it went through the Senate, the House, President signs off. But what if it's outside the scope of their actual authority? Do they put together laws that are outside of their authority?
All the time.
All the time. So what's the job of the states and the people? To say no, right? Goes back to one of the very first things we discussed this afternoon, nullify. Nullify. The states, it's rather clear, this principle, that when the federal government exceeds their authority, it's the obligation of the states to make sure they stay in their lane. See, it's their obligation. So, all right. So let's go to this one. We're going to hit on this one. This is the last one I'm going to show you, and this is what we're going to finish up with as we move into some ideas. This is a congressman out of Idaho in a public forum. This is a town hall. I want you to listen to this. This is how you change the process politically. This is how you change the country. It's one of the tools. Listen to this.
Document 100%. As our representative, you took an oath to uphold, protect, and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Yes? If you'd be so kind as to explain to everyone in this room Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution.
Article 1, Section 1 is the right to free speech.
No, that is the First Amendment. Article 1, Section 1, and for a man that took an oath to uphold, protect, and defend it, you really need to understand it. All legislative power shall be vested in a Congress, a House of Representatives, and a United States Senate. The legislative power, the laws, come from these two houses. There shall be no more activist judges. No more. It is specifically spelled out in the Constitution that all legislative power shall be vested in these two houses. My second point is the First Amendment. You mentioned free speech. The First Amendment guarantees all of us 5 rights. Would you be so kind as to tell us the 5 rights? You can articulate that. Those are the right to religion.
So, Hillary, do we have those handouts? So guys, this is a booklet, and we're going to dive into some of this because we talked about vetting candidates. And I know, Utah, you just had some things happen, but I think we need to keep, you're going to hear that this is all about changing the nature of the conversation, the nature of what's going on in town halls. Right? You have these big gatherings that are taking place all over the country, and individuals come in and they stump. There's just these stump speeches, and you listen to the questions. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, why are we asking such silly questions about this law and what's going to do here and all this sort of stuff? We're not asking the right questions. So this is a kind of a cliff notes that I put together on questions. And this is powerful.